2025 is going to conclude as one of the strongest yet strangest years in gaming, as we approach the annual Game of the Year Awards hosted by the Doritos Pope Jeff Keighley. We could be heading into what may be the most unique lineup of games ever selected for the GOTY nomination list. According to Metacritic, 4 of the top 5 best-rated games of the year are what we gamers would call indie projects. Hades 2, Clair Obscure Expedition 33, Blueprints, and Hollow Knight Silksong are all critical darlings and practically shoo-ins to receive some kind of recognition from this year's Game Awards. If it got more reviews, I'm sure Deltarune would have made the list as well. It's BS that Deltarune is getting snubbed and ignored by critics, but is not the subject of today's video. As frustrations and controversies continue to rise regarding the overall health of the gaming industry, many have taken to saying that indie games might be the answer to gaming's biggest problems. I wish that were true, but it simply isn't. As a fan of indie projects across many artistic mediums and an aspiring content creator myself, it warms my heart to see the success and prominence of so many indie titles. But I also am an advocate of truth, and the truth is that indies cannot save the gaming industry. In fact, and I know it is controversial for me to say this, the success of indie games might make the gaming industry even worse. This is Mercenary Publishing, and we're happy to present to you our thoughts on The State of the Video Game Industry, an episode on indie games. I want you to look at this picture. It is one of the most important pictures ever made to explain the flaws of statistical sampling. During World War II, Allied forces wanted to improve their fighter planes and add more armor to critical areas to improve plane survivability. To figure out where they could improve their designs, military analysts gathered planes that returned from battle and studied the locations they were hit most often by gunfire. The picture you see in this video was the result, with most bullet holes concentrated in the wings, tail, and outer fuselage. The initial and even intuitive conclusion was that in order to improve plane survivability, armor should be added to the places where planes were hit the most. However, an actual statistician by the name of Abraham Wald realized his peers made a mistake. If you look in the picture, you see that the cockpit, engines, and midsection don't have any bullet holes, right? But how does that make sense? Because those seem like pretty critical areas on the plane, right? That is when Mr. Wald realized they made a mistake. The surviving planes returned home only because they hadn't been hit in those 3 critical areas. If a plane was reinforced in the most commonly hit areas, there actually wouldn't be a noticeable increase in plane survivability. The answer to the problem was to actually reinforce the areas that hadn't been shot at as much on the planes that survived, the correct solution to the military's problem. This famous case study provides the basis for what is known as survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is the intuitive human habit of overlooking or ignoring failures and non-survivors when studying data. We humans have a strong desire to try and explain why winners succeed and losers fail. And in order to make the data cleaner, we often focus too much on the winners and not enough on the losers. You already see this all the time in the gaming industry and in business as a whole. Ever heard of a thing called trend chasing? Trend chasing is what happens when a company fails to take survivorship bias into account. Call of Duty led to the rise of the military shooter copycat. Dark Souls and Bloodborne led to the rise of the Soulsborne genre. PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds is why we have so many Battle Royale games, and Escape from Tarkov is why we've gotten so many extraction shooters in the past few years. If the gaming industry were to suddenly give us even more indie games following the successes that came out this year, then it would have learned nothing from its bad habit of trend chasing. The only thing that the best indie games this year have in common are their indie status. Expedition 33 is a turn-based role-playing game. Blue Prince is a puzzle game, and Hollow Knight Silksong is a Metroidvania. They didn't succeed just because they were all indie games, but because they were the best in class of each of their respective genres. But that is where we get to another problem of not only survivorship bias and indie games, but of gaming in general. We need less video games, not more. Being a kid means that you have the time to play games, but not the money. Being an adult used to mean that you had the money to play games, but not the time. Given present economic circumstances, many adults would say they have neither the time nor the money, which is why simply making more indie games is not a viable solution to fix the gaming industry. Because here's the truth about gaming's current problems. It's not that there aren't enough players and money to keep the industry afloat. In the year 2000, the gaming industry produced $36 billion in revenue. How much has it grown over the years? In 2024, the gaming industry generated over $182 billion in revenue. That means in the last 25 years, the gaming industry has grown 5 times larger in revenue generation. Despite what it might feel like, there are more people playing games and paying more money for games now than there were in the previous gaming generations. The big problem is that there are also more companies, and especially indies, releasing games than ever before. Here's a fun stat. In the year 2000, approximately 800 to 1,700 video games released to welcome in the new century. That seems pretty high, right? Even at the low end of 800, you would have to play 2 to 3 different games a day just to play every game that came out that year. So what do the numbers look like for 2024? 19,000 on Steam. Let me say that again. On Steam alone, almost 19,000 games were published. That number in itself is absurd, but it doesn't even factor console exclusives and mobile exclusives. Oh, and how do you factor the updates for live service games and DLC expansions? Do those count as new releases too? Revenue for the gaming industry between 2000 and 2024 may have grown by 5 times, but the amount of games and game expansions have grown by far, far more. Meanwhile, the actual purchasing power of the average person has failed to grow as quickly to keep pace with the new entrants into the gaming industry. $1 in 2000 has the purchasing power of $1.88 in 2025. That means that even though there are now 20 times more developers wanting you to give them your money over the last 25 years, your purchasing power hasn't even doubled in that same amount of time. So there are more companies than ever competing for your time and money in a world where there are many other alternatives for you to spend your time on. In an economic reality where your money is struggling to buy as much as it did before, this is an absolute worst-case scenario. An economic nightmare. And yet, you hear people make the argument that the solution to this problem is to make even more games, not less? Your answer to put out the fire is to make it even bigger? The answer isn't that we need more games, especially of the indie variety. The answer is that we just need fewer, more high-quality games that are a whole lot easier to find. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? The scientific answer is an absolute yes, because the act of a falling tree creates physical vibrations in the air that we refer to as sound waves. Whether or not you hear them doesn't negate the fact that these vibrations exist. But as a practical and philosophical matter, the answer to this famous question is this: it doesn't matter. Something that doesn't exist and something that isn't perceived as existing are effectively one and the same. This might not seem like it has anything to do with business, but let me ask you a question that might help you figure out where I'm going with this. How do you sell something that doesn't exist? The whole purpose of marketing is to try and sell you a good or service. More often than not, the way to do this isn't so much as to convince you that the item being sold is superior to other items of the same category, but to simply help you remember that which is being sold exists. Case in point, geckos and emus don't have anything to do with insurance, but there's a reason why you know what Geico and Liberty Mutual are. Red Bull doesn't give you wings, and its odd and unhealthy energy drink is used to advertise extreme sports. But how much time have you spent watching Red Bull ads? How many people do you know who come to watch the Super Bowl with friends not because they actually care about the teams playing, but because they want to share in the fun and laughter when the ads play? Simply knowing something exists, more often than not, is the number one obstacle in getting something to sell. That was also what helped the gaming industry do as well as it did for the first half of its existence. Something I think about quite often is just how radically the game buying experience has changed over the years. Here's a trip down nostalgia lane for you older viewers, and a look into another world for you youngins. From 1972 to the early years of the 21st century, the games you could play on your computer or home console were dictated entirely by what you could purchase at retail. That meant that the most important thing in the world to a gaming company was to acquire one of the 50 to 100 slots on the shelf space of your nearest Target, Walmart, Best Buy, and so on. As long as you had one of these spots, then customers looking to buy a new video game would naturally discover your game whenever they made a trip to the store. As an aside, this is why box art was significantly more imaginative and important back then compared to now, but let's talk more about that in another video. So what changed with the dawn of the 21st century? The internet! In 2002, Xbox Live launched and changed the world of console gaming forever, with the first downloadable-only Xbox Live arcade titles launching in 2004. When did Steam, the most popular storefront for PC gaming, release? 2003, with its first high-profile game, Half-Life 2, requiring Steam installation to even play the game in 2004. The rest is history, good and bad. The good news about the dawn of a digital storefront is that customers would no longer be restricted by the physical limitations of scarcity when it came to buying the games they wanted. A game can't sell out or go out of print on a digital store, nor do you have to worry about decay or thieves. Because there's no manufacturing or shipping costs, digital games could even be sold at cheaper prices. But while there are many great benefits, there's one significant problem with digital storefronts that grows worse with each passing day. The only time a digital game is removed from a storefront is when it is delisted, which makes discovering games an increasingly impossible task. Have you ever gone into a Barnes & Noble? As a book reader, I love it, but I always feel a bit of an existential crisis whenever I walk into one. If I were to try and guess how many books are at the average Barnes & Noble, what would it be? Hundreds? Thousands? Maybe even above 10,000? And yet they are all trying to compete with one another. Every book asking for your money, time, and attention. This is what the average digital gaming storefront has become. And unfortunately, it is indie titles, not those supposedly accursed AAA titles that are to blame. While the idea that anyone can publish their game on a digital storefront is cool in theory, the actual real-world result has been totally nightmarish. Want to browse games by new releases on Steam? Good luck finding the genuine diamond in the rough among asset flips and AI-generated garbage. Oh, looking to try something unique on your Switch too? Tell me in the comments how many hentai games you scrolled past today. PlayStation and Xbox are no better. Hell, try going into Fortnite custom creations and you'll have a terrible time trying to find the odd good map creation amidst all of the XP farms and low effort garbage. Low-effort indie games have absolutely ruined the discoverability of games. Anything that isn't AAAA or the rare indie that has escaped the chaff gets swallowed up in this flood of useless crap. And until digital storefronts make it harder to publish games, this problem will not go fixed. Unfortunately for us players, digital storefronts make money either way, so it's not in their immediate best interests to heavily regulate their marketplaces. Now, if you've been following this line of argument, you might be thinking that, sure, the problem is just the low-effort indie games. If we can simply set the line that divides the AI-generated smut and UE marketplace asset flips from the real indie games like Hollow Knight or Undertale, then indie games might just prove themselves to be the saviors of the gaming industry, right? No, not really. And to explain why, we need to talk about the weird relationship between advertising and revenue in gaming. I thought about combining this chapter of the essay with the last one, but because of how much math is involved, I figured it was better we put it here. So here's a depressing fact. What costs more, making a game or advertising it? The answer, in many cases, is the latter. For many AAA titles, the marketing budget is often the same, if not a little more, than the actual development budget of the game. For mobile games, marketing campaigns are often 3 to 10 times the original development budget. Have you heard of a game called Monopoly Go? You probably have, because in 2004, Scopely spent about $500 million on a game that cost approximately $70 million to make. As of March 2025, Scopely has spent over $1 billion just on marketing for their game. An obscene amount, but given how the game has made $5 billion since its launch, it was well worth the huge advertising investment. So what does this have to do with indie games? If indie games cost less to make, then it's fair to assume that they should just spend less on their advertising, right? That's the logical assumption to make, but it's not how it plays out in reality. Here's why. Let's use the Super Bowl as an example. One of the best times in the year to run your ad. The average 30-second commercial spot for the Super Bowl in 2025 was $8 million, with primetime spots selling for even more. That's actually $1 million more than it was in 2024, but here's the real kicker. That price doesn't change. It doesn't typically matter what you're trying to advertise. A new movie, a new shampoo, life insurance, chips. Everyone pays the same. Advertising costs don't typically change depending on what you're trying to sell. Sure, some charities or special causes might get a special discount, but whether you made a movie that cost $1 million to make or a movie that cost $100 million to make, your ad at the Super Bowl is going to cost you the same. This is where the math gets really fun, because now you have to consider both how many units a product will sell and at what price it will sell for. Why does this matter? Well, let's just pick two games out of a hat. Hollow Knight, one of the best-selling indie games of all time, and Days Gone, one of the worst AAA releases from Sony for the PS4. Hollow Knight has sold over 15 million copies since its release, while Days Gone has sold over 9 million copies. That would mean that Hollow Knight is more successful than Days Gone, right? Not even close, because Hollow Knight launched at a retail price of $15, while Days Gone launched at a retail price of $60. Both of these games have seen frequent discounts since then, but the point stands that Hollow Knight, one of the best-selling indie games of all time, would have needed to have sold closer to 30 million to generate more revenue than Days Gone, one of Sony's worst games from last gen. Undertale, one of my favorite games of all time, is believed to have sold over 10 million copies. However, it's doubtful that it has made over 100 million in revenue because its launch Steam price was $10 and it often goes on sale for less. How many copies of Hades 1 have sold for less than its $25 launch price? Stardew Valley has sold over 41 million copies, but as of 2023, the game had only generated $500 million in revenue, and just $150 million in profits. These are the best, most popular indie games of all time, and they still struggle to match the revenue and profits of even middling AAA successes. That's why, even when you cut out all of the garbage games from the equation, only about 4% of true indie games turn a profit. What about AAA games? That number is between 20 to 30, and while those still aren't amazing odds, the fact is that your average AAA game is about 10 times more likely to turn a profit than your typical indie darling. Even when you do have a breakout indie hit, its low average unit price means that it won't be a huge revenue generator compared to the likes of the average AAA hit. And most of this has to do with marketing. There are many great indie games that go ignored only because people don't know about them, but they can't have their chance in the spotlight because the costs of advertising them is simply too great. Call of Duty or God of War can air an ad while you're watching sports or screwing around here on YouTube. If an indie game tried to air even one such ad, it could equal years of their profits and make even a mega hit into an unprofitable failure. Which is the beauty and yet also the curse of indie games. Let's talk about what it really means to be a king, at least in terms of winning big when you're making a game. Here's a key memory from my college days. I took a variety of business classes during my undergraduate years, back when I thought I was meant to become an accountant. While I'm very glad I ended up going a different way in life, part of my curriculum involved taking a course on economics, what the benefits and downsides of millionaires. That was one of our class lectures, and since it was 3 hours long, I won't repeat everything that was discussed, but one of the key points that came up had to do with pillows. The pillow. One of life's most important necessities. The thing about pillows is that while everyone needs one, and sometimes two, how many pillows you need doesn't really change according to your wealth. Whether you are dirt poor, middle class, nouveau riche, or even a billionaire, how many pillows you need doesn't change. The rain falls on the poor and the fortunate alike, and everyone needs just 1 or 2 pillows to get a good night's sleep. And therein lies the problem. Suppose a store wants to sell pillows for $10. On day 1, 10 people with $10 come and each of them buy 1 pillow. The store has sold 10 pillows for $10, making $100 in revenue, while 10 people have gone home with pillows to improve their sleep at night. Now the store opens on the second day, and now 21 people come to shop. However, this time, one person comes with $1,000 and 20 people come with $5. The first man buys only one pillow, while the 20 other people leave empty-handed because they can't afford the pillows. On this day, the store has only made $10 in revenue, despite the fact that there were more customers and more total money than there was the day before. Because there was only one person who could afford it, only one person will benefit on day 2, while both the store selling pillows and the 20 other poor people will all end the day not getting what they wanted. This is the biggest problem with centralized wealth, especially in capitalist societies. Unless the man with $1,000 were to spend his money and give the pillows away out of the charity of his heart, he is the only one that benefits in this scenario. The store could have lowered its prices to try and sell more pillows, eating its profit on each pillow sold, while also making it so that the wealthy individual has to spend even less money if he wants more pillows. Alternatively, the store could just wait until its customers have enough money to afford its pillows, but that means the 20 poor customers will have to suffer from bad sleeping until they can afford buying new pillows. What does any of this have to do with gaming? Because, contrary to what you might expect, AAA games succeeding benefits the gaming industry more than indie games succeeding. Yes, it is fun to make fun of public corporations, but corporations not only employ more people, but also redistribute their profits to shareholders when their games succeed. The CEO might get a big paycheck, but the fact is that hundreds, if not thousands of people also gain when a AAA game turns on a big enough profit to justify a development studio staying in business. Both the employees who worked on the game and shareholders, many of whom are people like you and me thanks to retail investing, benefit when a AAA game does well. This is not the case with indie games. An indie game is inherently small by nature, which means that when they hit it big, the profits are not distributed to as many people as they are with AAA games. Blueprints was largely developed by one person. Clair Obscure's core team was about 33 people. Most of Hollow Knight's Silksong was developed with a core team of 3 people. Hades 2 was largely made with about 25 people. It is awesome these indie games succeeded. I love it when any indie project succeeds, just as I love any kind of rags to riches story. But I'm also someone who's comfortable with the realities of capitalism, especially in the gaming space. The uneven distribution of wealth doesn't really bother me, but if it irritates you, then you probably shouldn't be so quick to champion indie games. After all, what is the #1 most successful indie game of all time? Minecraft. Do I even need to tell you what Notch has done with all that money he made off of the world's most popular video game? I've already said it a few times, but I'll say it again lest you get the wrong idea. I do love indie games. Deltarune is my game of the year for 2025. My most played game last year was Balatro. I'd be embarrassed to show you how many hours I have in Vampire Survivors, and it bears repeating that most of the top scoring games for this year, 2025, are all indie. But as challenges continue to make our gaming hobby harder and harder to enjoy, I worry that the wrong message is being sent. Simply investing more into the indie industry or making smaller games for less money at a faster rate will not make things better. On the contrary, the solution to our gaming problems, and to much of life in general now, is the opposite. We need better games. We need more meaningful art. We have enough in our backlogs and going on in our lives to keep our attention. With discoverability being worse than ever and advertising costs being as high as ever, the best way forward for projects is to actually take their time and come out in the best shape they can be. No one is thrilled that Silksong took 7 years to make, or the fact that Deltarune is still only halfway done after 7 years. But the quality and the sales speak for themselves. Indie or AAA, let the best game win.
And that's it for this essay. Thank you so much for watching. This will likely be the first in a series that will discuss the state of the video game industry, so please be sure to subscribe if you want to learn more about gaming economics and development. I also do love comments, so whether you disagree with one of my conclusions or have suggestions on how to make this series more interesting to watch, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. We also do monthly giveaways on the channel, so be sure to review the description for each video to see what you can win this month. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video, Mercenary.